In the last episode, I briefly mentioned that Jesus perfectly fulfilled prophecies that no human being could have possibly engineered. Indeed, scholars believe that the Old Testament contains over 300 prophecies about a future Messiah, and that Jesus uniquely fulfilled them in a way that no human being could have possibly planned. For example, Jacob prophesied that the Messiah would come through the lineage of the tribe of Judah. Now, sure enough, when Jesus was born, he was born into the lineage of the tribe of Judah. The prophet Samuel further specified the Messiah would be a descendant of King David. Again, sure enough, Jesus was born into the lineage of King David. And obviously, no one can engineer this. No one can engineer the family that they're going to be born into. The prophet Hosea said the Messiah would spend a portion of his time in Egypt. Sure enough, Jesus spent a portion of his childhood in Egypt. Micah prophesied the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Sure enough, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Zechariah prophesied the Messiah would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Sure enough, Jesus was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. The Psalms prophesied the Messiah would be pierced in his hands and his feet, and that was written down around 600 years before crucifixion was even invented. But, sure enough, Jesus was pierced through his hands and feet by crucifixion. The same psalm prophesies that people would cast lots for the Messiah's clothing. Sure enough, the soldiers cast lots for Jesus' clothing as he was being crucified. I'll write a blog listing more of these prophecies at some point and link it at the bottom of this video. But as I said before, there are actually over 300 of these prophecies, all written down centuries and centuries before Jesus even arrived on earth. And yet when he did arrive, Jesus fulfilled them all in a very supernatural way. The mathematician Peter Stoner once chose just 8 of these prophecies, and then he calculated the probability of one man being able to fulfill them just by accident. He, along with 600 of his students, worked out that the chance of one man being able to fulfill just 8 of these prophecies by accident was 1 in 10 to the power of 17. He said, "Let's try to visualize this chance. Suppose that we take 10 to the power of 17 silver dollars and lay them on the face of Texas. They will cover all of the state 2 feet deep. Now mark one of these silver dollars and stir the whole mass thoroughly all over the state. Blindfold a man and tell him he can travel as far as he wishes, but he must pick up the one specific silver dollar that has been marked. What chance would he have of getting the right coin? Just the same chance that the prophets would have had of writing these 8 prophecies and having them all come true in any one man from their day to the present time." And remember, that's just for 8 of the prophecies. Jesus fulfilled over 300 of these things. So at that point, we're actually talking about numbers that are impossible for the human brain to comprehend. That Jesus fulfilled these prophecies so accurately really has no natural explanation. Now, probably the most significant prophecy about a Messiah comes in Isaiah 53, which was written about 700 years before Jesus was even born. In this passage, it very specifically describes the kind of death the Messiah was going to die. It talks about him carrying our sins. It talks about him being pierced. And again, that was written 300 years before crucifixion was even invented. It talks about him being whipped. It talks about his silence before his accusers. It says his death would happen at a relatively young age, that he would be placed in a rich man's tomb. It's just a very specific prophecy about the kind of death the Messiah was going to die. And again, when Jesus came, he fulfilled all of these prophecies absolutely perfectly. In fact, so identifiable is Jesus in this Old Testament prophecy that even non-Christians can recognize who this prophecy is describing. In this next clip, Bob Daly, one of the street interview volunteers for the Fuel Project, went out onto the street and he read this passage. He read Isaiah 53 to some random non-Christians, and then he asked them who they thought it might be describing.
Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we were healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
Obviously had rhetoric about Jesus Christ, right? He's the Christian God, so it's probably a Christianity.
Okay, cool. Do you think it's the Old Testament or New Testament?
New Testament, because Jesus was in the New Testament.
New Testament, all right.
It seemed like it was too, it seemed like you would have to have hindsight to be that accurate. I think
New.
There's like
New Testament.
New Testament, because it's talking about Jesus?
Yeah.
Cool. Who do you think it's talking about?
Jesus.
Now, Raleigh, would you be impressed to know that it was actually written 700 years before Christ was born? The
Really?
prophet Isaiah wrote it. It's Isaiah 53, 6 through like 8 or 9. Isn't that kind of impressive?
Oh, cool.
Is that kind of trippy?
Yeah, for sure.
Is that kind of impressive?
I mean,
Yes, but you don't want it to be, right?
I don't know. It's impressive, yeah.
So even non-Christians can recognize that this passage in Isaiah is about Jesus. In fact, it's so identifiable as Jesus that they thought it must have been written down after him, because you would need hindsight in order to write something this accurate. And yet, in fact, it was written down 700 years before Jesus was even born. These prophecies just don't have a natural explanation. And that being the case, I want to ask you again, it's the same question as the past few videos. Given that Jesus uniquely fulfilled these prophecies in a way that no human being could have possibly planned or engineered, who do you think that Jesus just might be?